Another day of mass protests in Colombia as the national strike against President Iván Duque is into its fourth week. Authorities in Mexico warn U.S. officials about exceeding their duties on Mexican soil. And they're calling it the worst deal ever. Indigenous movements, small island states, and many more slammed the governments who failed to deliver at the COP Climate Summit. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Students, trade unions, and other social movements have called for another national stoppage in Colombia on Monday. Protests against President Iván Duque and his neoliberal reforms have been going on for 25 days now. They're also demanding an end to the repression against demonstrators and the dismantling of the ESMAD riot police. In the afternoon, a mass pot-banging protest is expected in Bogotá's Bolivar Square. Recent opinion polls show that 70% of Colombians reject the government of President Iván Duque. Another indigenous activist was murdered in Colombia on Sunday morning. Cristian Vitonas, aged 21, was a member of the rebel youth movement and several indigenous organizations in the department of Cauca. He was shot dead in the Manzano region of Toribio. Our correspondent Hernán Tovar has more from Bogotá.
Today, a protest is being held in front of the Congress where the tax reform is being debated, a reform that the protesters say will damage the interests of workers and the impoverished middle class while benefiting big companies and the rich. This reform was meant to be passed by today, but it seems the protests will not finish in time and the Congress will have to go into an extraordinary session in order to extend the deadline until the 20th of December. That means the protests organized by the National Strike Committee will also be extended until that date. So in the afternoon, the social movements are holding this big pot-banging protest in the Plaza Bolivar to demand that the Congress reject this reform. And there are other protest calls in major cities around the country.
We thank Hernán Tovar for that report. The Mexican foreign minister has rejected the United States' intention to send over officials to monitor compliance with the USMCA trade agreement. This comes after the U.S. House of Representatives proposed a designation of up to so-called experts who would monitor compliance with the deal's local labor reform in Mexico.
Mexico's limit is that we will not accept any person, any official from another country who attempts to carry out tasks that exceed those established by law.
More than 200 municipalities in Chile carried out a mass public consultation on Sunday to find out people's views on a new constitution. The vote was not binding, but over 2 million people took part. 91% of them supported the need for a new constitution. On the key question of how a new constitution should be drawn up, the majority supported a sovereign constituent assembly, 3 times as many as those who thought members of Congress should be involved. This has been a central demand of protesters in the streets. The 17th summit of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America People's Trade Treaty was held in Cuba on Saturday. Here, progressive leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean reaffirmed their commitment to integration, solidarity, justice, and cooperation.
Cuba once again became the capital of regional integration, with a call for dialogue to continue making Latin America and the Caribbean a region of peace.
We need to promote the ALBA TCP as a platform for political coordination in defense of independence, peace, and integration, stemming from solidarity and cooperation.
Latin American Caribbean leaders ratified the final declaration of the summit, rejecting unilateral measures used by the United States to attack Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other nations. The declaration also showed solidarity with social movements that combat neoliberalism in the continent.
We demand respect for the self-determination of our people, for our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. We oppose foreign interference in nations' internal affairs.
At the historic stairs of the University of Havana, an event to honor the 15th anniversary of the ALBA was held. Participants reaffirmed their commitment to solidarity and cooperation, principles established 15 years ago as an alternative to hegemony and capitalist interests that threaten the people of Latin America and the Caribbean.
They want to convince us that capitalism will last forever. As such, they want social inequality, misery, and exclusion to be eternal as well. Time is history, and ours comes from Bolívar, San Martín, Martí, Che, Fidel, Chávez, and Sandino. It comes from our fight against slavery, against colonialism, against invasions, against the illegal economic blockade by the genocidal empire.
Leaders agreed that for the ALBA, the main goal will continue to be increasing people's quality of life and the self-sufficiency of the region.
We have agreed to relaunch, with great strength, the Petrocaribe project during the first months of 2020. This is an essential project for the Caribbean's energy security. We have also decided to relaunch other projects for the benefit of our people.
The 17th ALBA TCP summit reaffirmed the need for the organization to remain at the forefront of integration, given the current regional situation, which has seen a coup against the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, popular mobilizations against neoliberalism in Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador, and increased hostilities by the United States against Cuba and Venezuela.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thousands of Gambians have taken to the streets demanding that the president step down. Citizens say President Adama Barrow must honor a previous agreement in which he said he will step down after serving in the interim government for 3 years. But Adama, who came into power in 2016 through a coalition of political parties, has indicated intentions to run in the 2021 elections. On Monday, South Africans commemorated National Reconciliation Day. The day, which is celebrated every 16th of December, reflects on peace and tolerance between the once fighting sides during the colonial apartheid era. During a keynote address, the country's president reiterated the need to complete the reconciliation process by addressing present inequalities.
If we do indeed want true reconciliation, which celebrating and commemorating today, we do need to address the injustices of the past. And the land question is one of those injustices that must be addressed. Whether we like it or not, it must happen here in South Africa.
Thus, the Zimbabwean vice president's wife has appeared in court to answer fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder charges. Constantine Kuheyas Shiweya's wife, Mari Mubaiwa, was recently arrested by the country's anti-corruption commission for having allegedly sending almost $1 million from her Zimbabwean bank account to South Africa. She is also accused of attempting to murder the vice president during the time when he was sick and hospitalized. She has denied bail on the grounds that she is likely to abandon court. Tropical storm Pawan has forced about 182,000 people to flee from their homes due to flooding across Somalia. The heavy winds and rains destroyed more than 200 farms, as well as infrastructure and roads in some of the worst hit areas in Hirshabelle, Beledweyne, and southwestern states. The people are counting their losses, but heavy rains are expected to continue.
Recent drought claimed some 77 goats of mine. Only 7 remained for me, but later I sold them to survive. Now I don't have anything.
All farmlands nearby the town were swept by the floods. Local businessmen' inventories were destroyed by the floods, and the farmers, who used to grow vegetables, fruits, and cash crops, were also hit badly.
The failure of the recently ended COP25 to achieve an expected outcome has triggered anger and condemnation over the developed countries' lack of commitment. Representatives of indigenous people, environmental activists, and developing countries expected to see more explicit language and commitments, especially from the world's developed countries, who are the main polluters.
Thank you. Society has been shut out of this COP. Our lives, children and future generations are in your hands, and you are failing us. Do you want to be remembered as the ones who had the chance to act, but decided not to? As betrayers of our generation, of indigenous people, and of communities desperately fighting on the ground? We are rising, we are fighting, and we will win. COPs have failed people and the planet. People power, climate justice, now. Thank you.
We can't help but feel the irony of your refusal to include human rights and Indigenous people's rights in Article 6, when we know that market approaches have already directly harmed our communities. Our knowledge cannot be upheld if our rights are not upheld.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged his support to the Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam in the face of continued violent anti-government protests. At a meeting in Beijing, President Xi condemned the Hong Kong's leader's courage during the current difficult times. The Hong Kong police have been struggling to contain violent protests as the former British colony's worst political crisis drags on to its 7th month.
We will continue to be unwavering in supporting you, to lead the Hong Kong Special Administrative Government, to govern in accordance with the law, supporting the Hong Kong police to firmly uphold the law, and hope people from all walks of life in Hong Kong will unite and bring the development of Hong Kong back to the right track.
More than 100,000 people rallied in Hong Kong on Sunday to oppose violence and support the territory's police. They waved Chinese flags and condemned the violent protests that have brought chaos to the territory for several months now. Sunday night again saw anti-government protesters set fires and smash windows at a shopping mall in Hong Kong. After several months of ups and downs, the announcement that China and the United States finally agreed on phase 1 of an agreement to end the trade war jump-started markets. It also raised hopes for the end of a harmful conflict.
China and the United States have closed the first phase of the agreement to resolve the trade war, with a consensus on sensitive issues such as intellectual property, agricultural products, finance, and technology.
The agreement will serve the fundamental interests of the people of both countries and of the world, and will have a positive impact in areas such as the economy, trade, investment, and financial market. In addition, the agreement is in line with the main direction of deepening China's opening up to the world, as well as with the needs to promote high-quality economic development.
In compliance with the first phase of the agreement, both sides cancelled a round of additional tariffs they intended to apply to each other. The United States also pledged to reduce some of the tariff it already imposes on Chinese products.
We hope that after this signing, both parties will abide by what has been agreed upon and seriously implement the provisions of Phase 1 and strive to promote the development of bilateral economic and trade relations, as well as global economic and financial stability.
As part of the agreement, Beijing will purchase more high-quality and competitive agricultural products, goods and services from the North American market.
I saw the news. I thought it was important. It is something that China is trying to solve in order to maintain the stability of the economy and continue growing.
The news of this initial consensus was well received in business circles, returning some calm to international investors. However, experts warn that it doesn't mean the end of a long dispute, which is heavily influenced by politics.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, has postponed until Thursday consultations on the formation of a new government. Overnight, dozens of people were wounded as protesters faced off against police for a second night. The demonstrators opposed the return of Saad Hariri as prime minister after he resigned 6 weeks ago. They want an independent government without the political elite that has dominated Lebanon in recent decades.
We have to agree on something. I am here and I have nothing to lose. I am ready to sacrifice my life for the revolution so that Lebanon can be a real homeland. For the first time in my life, I feel that I can dream of a new homeland, a real one.
This is how we should continue, and this is how it started. We will not leave until they submit to our demands. They are the ones who stole the country. They are the ones who brought us to this point. Not us. We are citizens who want our rights. What we are asking for is not something that they own. It is actually our own rights that they took away from us.
And to discuss the situation in Lebanon, we were joined earlier by independent political commentator on Syria and Lebanon, Hadi Nasrallah in Beirut. This is what he had to say about the impact that Saad Hariri's resignation had on the country.
The basic demands of the protesters was to issue one independent government, which is not aligned with any political party from the corrupt authorities of Lebanon since 30 years from now. What Saad Hariri did after he resigned, he issued a new term, which is we were calling for a technocratic government, which is basically a government led by experts in each cabinet. They are not affiliated with the current political parties. Saad Hariri issued a new term, which is technopolitical government, which is going to be a technocratic government, but it is actually experts from the current ruling elite parties, and is going to be headed by Saad Hariri himself, which is why the people refused this term and refused this plan.
Hadi Nasrallah also spoke about claims that popular protests have been hijacked by outside forces.
Well, based on what I've seen, there are some external actors who are trying to hijack or maybe trying to orchestrate some sides of this protest to aim it against some political opponent like the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, or other factions in the government. But it is not as it's represented that it is fully controlled by outside actors. It is there are mainly interior actors who are also opponents to the current government headed by Michel Aoun. They are trying to orchestrate this to make it to aim it from fighting corruption to overthrowing the full regime.
Commuters in France continue to grip with the transport strike, which on Monday entered its 12th day. While commuters express frustration with the disruption on the transport system, protesters have threatened to step up the strike if the French government does not withdraw its controversial pension reform plan.
Yes, this morning I found it crazy. All the people walking, that everyone who's usually underground was outside, and that people found bikes, scooters, roller skates. So yes, I think we do what we can with the means we have.
Meanwhile, French government's High Commissioner for Pensions, Jean-Paul Delevoye, has resigned. The French government official, whose controversial pension reform plans have triggered nationwide strikes, is said to have resigned over his failure to declare outside income. Protesters welcomed his resignation and hoped his proposed reform must also be revoked since he is no longer in office. Female Turkish lawmakers have protested in parliament against gender violence. Opposition MPs banged on tables and sang the Turkish version of viral Chilean song "The Rapist Is You" while holding pictures of women killed in domestic violence. Abuse against women has been a major challenge in Turkey. Last year, almost 500 women were murdered. And according to the World Health Organization, 38% of women in Turkey are subject to violence. Hate speech against child migrants in Spain is turning into acts of direct violence. Most recently, a grenade attack on a migrant refuge in Madrid.
About 1,000 people gathered in Madrid's Hortaleza neighborhood to condemn a racist attack at a center for unaccompanied migrant children. The police had to disarm a grenade that someone had thrown at the refuge. which shelters young migrants aged between 15 and 17. Neighbors wanted to show their support for the young people.
We have been worried about this situation in the neighborhood and the center for some time. It doesn't have enough resources and there has been an increase in hate speech, which culminated in this awful violent attack on Thursday.
This is not the first attack on migrant children in Spain. For many, such violence is a result of the hate speech and stigmatization used by the far right against foreign minors.
The rhetoric of Vox and the far right, and often of the Popular Party and Ciudadanos as well, is creating an atmosphere of confrontation, which leads to xenophobia and racism against these kids.
These welcome centers are meant to be temporary, but they have become their only home. The government keeps almost 10,000 migrant children in such conditions. By not granting them nationality, they are breaking the law, which says underage migrants cannot be illegal.
If a minor arrives in Spain and leaves the center after they are 18, they should be legally recognized migrant. But many local authorities are not doing the paperwork. So these young boys and girls come out with no support networks, no way of earning a living, and on top of that, as illegal immigrants.
According to Save the Children, in 2017, 2 out of 3 asylum requests from minors were refused in Spain, while the number of children migrating continues to rise every year, a situation which local administrations are totally failing to address.
Since 2015, more than 5,000 boys and girls have disappeared from these protection centers, which makes us think that either they have continued their journeys elsewhere or they have fallen into trafficking networks. We cannot accept that in 4 years, 5,000 children just disappear.
Support organizations are demanding a reform of the system to ensure an effective child perspective is applied and the rights of young migrants are guaranteed. But they also condemn the hate speech that can lead to someone putting explosive in a refuge for children.
With that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.